Right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about estimating with percents. Now, estimating with percents, one of the first things you want to do is we need to get an idea of finding like 10% of something or 1% of something, so that's going to really help us out. So I'm going to start with explaining kind of how we can do that, and then you'll see the trick, and I think you'll be able to do it a lot quicker. But let's say, for example, you were trying to find 10% of 30. Okay, these are relatively easy numbers to work with. Now you could use proportions. That's how we had been doing it in class. Part over whole equals percent over 100. I would solve my proportion by cross multiplying. That gives me 100x, or 100 times x equals 30 times 10, or 100x equals 300. Divide both sides by 100, and we get x equals 3. Now what we can notice here is that when we're finding 10% of a number, all we actually have to do is move that decimal place one place to the left. Okay, 30 turned into 3. So if I had, for example, we can just say right here, to find 10%, all we have to do is move decimal once to the left. This is an important thing to remember. Okay, so we can find the 10% of a couple different things right here. So let's say we had to find 10% of 40. Move the decimal point one place over, that's going to give us 4. Okay, we could do all this proportions and stuff, or we could just remember that you're just going to have to move it once to the left. If we wanted to find 10% of 35, one space over, that gives us 3.5. 10% of something much bigger, let's say of something like 2,000 or 272.8. Decimal point, one step over, 27.28. Okay, so we can find 10% of a number very easily. We can also do the same thing if we're working with 1% of something. But instead of moving it one time over, we're going to move it 2 times over, because it's 1/100th of it. So for instance, if you had to find 1% of 40, move it 2 times. 1, 2 over, that's 0.4. 1% of 35, similar, move it 2 times over, 0.35 or 35/100ths. Last one, 1% of 272.8, move it over 1, 2 times, that's 2.728, 728 thousandths. Okay, so we're seeing that we can use, this is an important tool, an important thing to know. Okay, all right, so we're going to move on to the next step, which is going to be looking at how we can actually apply this to some problems. Okay, so I'm going to take this page off. So now let's say you had something like 38% of 30. Now, that's not an even 10. That's not 10%, so it's going to be a little more tricky. But what we can do is we can round it. This is about estimating. This is really just going to be helpful to check our answers, think, is this a reasonable answer? First thing is we want to round that to a multiple of 10. So I'm going to say 40% of 30. That's going to get me something pretty close. And so I just round it up, 38 closer to 40 if we're counting by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40. And so that's what we're looking to find. Now I'm going to remember that I can find 10% really easily. I know 10% of 30, all I have to do is move the decimal point one time over. That's going to be 3. And you might think, well, why do I need 10%? Well, 40% is just 4 times 10%. So I just move the decimal point over once, I got that's 3, but I want to find 40%. So I would just multiply that by 4, and if I do that over there, multiply this by 4, we're basically just saying this is going to give me 40%. 3 times 4 is going to give me 12. So 40% of 30 is 12. So this right here, this is about, I'm going to do this kind of about symbol, this is about 12. And all I had to do to figure that out was round it to the nearest 10, find 10%, and then multiply it by 4. Okay. Now we could do this. Let's say we wanted to find, let's do another one. Let's say we wanted to find 82% of 25. So I'm going to follow the same step. I'm going to round this to the nearest 10. It's about 80%. Now I know that 10% of 25, move the decimal point one time over, that's going to give me 2.5. But I want to do 8 times that. So I'm going to have to just multiply this by 8. And I'm multiplying by 8 over here. 8 over here, this is going to give me 80%. And then this over here, let's see, we got 40, 20. Remember, decimal point goes over 1 time. So 80% is about, or 82% is about 20, because 80% is 20. So again, we use finding 10%, took 10%, multiplied it by 8, that gives us 80%, so it's about 20. Now we can also do this with larger numbers. Let's say, for example, we had to find 124% of 50. I'm just going to round it to the nearest 10. I know that 10% of 50 is going to equal 5. Just move the decimal point over once. I want to find 120%, so I'm just multiplying it by 12. You can also always just cover up that last 0 to remember what you multiply by. So that's going to give me 120%, times 12. And then this will be times 12. That's going to give me 60. Okay, and that gives me 120% of 50 is going to equal 60. So this is going to be about 60. So you can do that with more than 100%. Now, last thing we can see is, let's say you're working with really small numbers. Now you can actually go back to thinking about that 1% rule. Let's say you wanted to find what is 7.4% of 6. Now it doesn't really, you could round it to 10 and say, well, it's about 0.6. But we could probably get a little bit closer. You could also round it to the nearest whole. 7.4% would round to about 7%. I remember I can find 1% of a number by just moving the decimal point over 2 times. 1, 2. But I have to fill in that empty spot with a 0, so that's going to be 0.06. And I want to find 7%, so I'm just going to have to multiply this by 7. That'd give me 7%. Multiply this over here by 7. And it's going to give me 42. 0 over there, and then 2 digits after the decimal, so I go over 2 times. So that's going to be 7% of 6 equals 42 hundredths. So that means that this right here is about 42 hundredths. Okay, so we can see for all of these, the key thing, if we're estimating fraction or percents, round it to a 10 or maybe to a whole number. Find that 10% really quickly, and then just multiply it by how many tens you're going to have. And this is a really good way to check your work, even just mental math. Your teacher